Dr. Jiwoo Park stared out the viewport of the transport ship, watching the planet Krevmar grow larger against the black of space. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her data pad. In all her years studying alien species, she had never been this nervous. The briefing had been clear. The Krevathi were dangerous. Every species in the Galactic Assembly said so. They were apex predators, warriors with razor-sharp claws and teeth designed to tear through flesh. Their homeworld was a death trap of aggressive fauna and harsh conditions. No diplomat had successfully made contact with them in over 50 years. Most species refused to even try anymore. But humanity was different. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, and they still believed in second chances, or maybe they were just too stubborn to listen to warnings. Nervous? Commander Taehyun Choi's voice came from beside her. He was checking his pulse rifle for the third time, his security training evident in every careful movement. Jiwoo nodded. Terrified, actually. What if the other species are right? What if we're walking into a massacre? Taehyun smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Then I do my job and get you out. But I don't think it'll come to that. The Krevathi agreed to this meeting. That means something. The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. Through the viewport, Jiwoo could see a landscape of dark purple forests and crimson mountains. Two suns hung in the sky, casting everything in shades of orange and red. It looked beautiful and alien and completely terrifying. The settlement came into view as they descended. It wasn't what Jiwoo expected. Instead of crude structures or military fortifications, she saw elegant buildings made of dark stone and polished metal. Gardens grew between the structures, filled with plants that glowed softly in the double sunlight. It looked like a place where people lived, not where monsters lurked. The transport landed in a clearing at the edge of the settlement. Jiwoo's heart hammered in her chest as the door opened. Taehyun exited first, his weapon lowered but ready. 4 other security officers followed, forming a protective circle. Jiwoo stepped out last, her legs unsteady. A group of Krevathi waited for them. They were massive. The shortest stood at least 7 feet tall, with the largest reaching nearly 9. Their bodies were covered in scales that shifted between black and deep green, catching the light like oil on water. They walked on 2 legs like humans, but their posture was different, more predatory. Long tails swayed behind them for balance. Their faces were angular, with large eyes that glowed amber in the shadows. When they breathed, Jiwoo could see rows of sharp teeth. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, but Jiwoo forced herself to stand still. She had studied their basic language, learned what little was known about their customs. She raised her empty hands, palms forward, in what her research suggested was a peaceful greeting. The largest Krevathi stepped forward. The scales around his neck were darker, marked with white patterns that suggested age and status. His amber eyes fixed on Jiwoo with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. I am Vekra, he said in heavily accented but clear standard galactic, chieftain of this settlement. You are the humans? Yes, Jiwoo replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. I am Dr. Jiwoo Park, xenobiologist and cultural specialist. This is Commander Taehyun Choi and his security team. We come in peace, seeking understanding between our peoples. Vekra's head tilted slightly. His tail swished once, twice. Jiwoo wished she knew what that meant. The galaxy fears us, he said simply. Why do humans not fear? We do fear, Jiwoo admitted. Fear is natural when meeting the unknown. But we believe fear should lead to understanding, not hatred. Something flickered in Vekra's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Come, he said. We will talk. They followed the Krevathi into the settlement. Jiwoo's eyes darted everywhere, taking in details. The streets were clean and well-maintained. The buildings showed artistic touches, carvings and decorations that spoke of a culture that valued beauty. Other Krevathi watched them pass, their expressions unreadable. Then Jiwoo saw them. A group of small figures peering from behind a building. They were Krevathi, but tiny, barely reaching 4 feet tall. Children, cubs, her research notes had called them. One of the cubs was braver than the others. It stepped partially into view, its scales a lighter green than the adults, its eyes huge and curious. It stared directly at Jiwoo. She smiled and gave a small wave. The cub's eyes widened. Its tail shot up straight, and then it ducked back behind the building. But Jiwoo saw it peek out again a moment later, still watching. Rin, an adult Krevathi's sharp voice rang out. Inside now. All of you. The cubs scattered like leaves in wind, but that one, Rin, looked back at Jiwoo one more time before disappearing. The meeting took place in a large hall at the center of the settlement. Vecra sat on one side of a low table, with several other adult Krivathi flanking him. Jiwoo and Taehyun sat opposite, the security team standing behind them. The conversation was difficult. The Krivathi spoke carefully, measuring each word. They explained that their people had been pushed to the edges of known space, labeled as dangerous, denied trade and contact. They defended their territory fiercely, because no one else would defend them. They raised their children to be strong because the galaxy gave them no other choice. Jiwoo listened and took notes. She asked questions about their culture, their history, their way of life. She tried to see past the sharp teeth and claws to the people underneath. Vecra watched her throughout, his expression gradually shifting from suspicion to something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or cautious hope. Most species send warriors and demand things, Vecra said as the meeting drew to a close. You send a scholar and ask questions, why? Because we want to know who you really are, Jiwoo said. Not who others say you are. Vecra's tail moved in a slow, deliberate pattern. You may stay, he said finally. If you wish to learn about us, we will allow it. One of your people, here in our settlement, to observe and understand. Taehyun started to speak, probably to refuse, but Jiwoo cut him off. I'll stay, she said. I volunteer. Jiwoo, that's not, Taehyun began. It's exactly what we need, she said firmly. This is why I came. To build bridges. I'll stay. Vecra nodded slowly. It is decided then. Dr. Jiwoo Park will remain as our guest. We will provide shelter and protection. She may observe our people freely. As they worked out the details, Jiwoo felt eyes on her. She glanced toward a window and saw them again. The cubs, 6 of them now, all watching her with those huge glowing eyes. When they realized she saw them, they scattered again. All except Rin, who stayed a moment longer. The small Krivathi touched its chest with one clawed hand, then pointed at Jiwoo. Then it ran. Jiwoo didn't know what the gesture meant, but something told her it was important. That night, as she settled into the small habitat the Krivathi had prepared for her, Jiwoo stood at the window. The settlement glowed softly under the light of 2 moons. Somewhere out there were those cubs, those children who watched her with curiosity instead of fear. Maybe, she thought, that's where the real bridge would be built. Not between diplomats and chieftains, but between a lonely human and curious children, who saw her as something new and interesting, rather than something to fear. She fell asleep hoping she was right. 3 weeks on Krevmar had taught Jiwoo that loneliness could exist even when surrounded by others. The Krivathi adults were polite but distant. They allowed her to observe their daily activities, answered her questions with careful precision, but never invited her closer. She was a guest, always a guest, never part of their world. Her habitat sat at the edge of the settlement, a small domed structure with windows that looked out over the purple forests. Inside, she had her research equipment, her bed, a small kitchen, and too much time to think. Every evening, she compiled her notes and sent reports back to human space. Every evening, she wondered if she was really accomplishing anything. The adult Krivathi moved through their lives with purpose and efficiency. They hunted in groups, bringing back meat from the forests. They crafted tools and weapons with skilled hands. They gathered in the evenings to share meals and tell stories in their own language, which Jiwoo was slowly learning to understand. But they never invited her to join these gatherings. She noticed that the cubs were kept separate from her. Whenever she approached an area where young Krivathi were playing or learning, the adults would quietly guide them away. At first, Jiwoo thought they were protecting the children from her. Then she realized they might be protecting her from the children. After all, even young predators had claws and teeth. The thought made her sad. Those cubs had looked at her with such curiosity that first day. Especially Rin. On the 23rd night of her stay, Jiwoo sat at her small desk reviewing footage of Krivathi hunting patterns. The double moons cast silver light through her windows. She rubbed her tired eyes and considered making tea when movement outside caught her attention. 3 small figures stood just beyond her window. Cubs. They were perfectly still. Watching her, Jiwoo's breath caught. She recognized Rin immediately, standing in the center. The other 2 were unfamiliar. One was slightly larger, with darker scales. The other was smaller, with a white patch on its chest. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other through the glass. Jiwoo didn't move. She barely breathed. Then very slowly she raised one hand and waved just as she had on that first day. The cubs scattered into the darkness like smoke. Jiwoo's heart sank. She'd frightened them. But then she saw Rin peek back around the corner of her habitat, just the eyes and snout visible. Checking to see if she was still there. Jiwoo smiled and waved again, more gently this time. Rin's head tilted. Then the cub disappeared. The next evening, Jiwoo made sure to sit by her window as darkness fell. She pretended to work on her datapad but kept her attention on the world outside. They came again. This time there were 3 cubs, including Rin. They approached more carefully than before, staying low to the ground. When they reached the window, they didn't run. They sat down about 10 feet away and watched. Jiwoo set down her datapad. She looked at them and smiled. She didn't wave this time, didn't make any sudden movements. She just let them observe her. After several minutes, Rin stood up. The cub approached the window slowly, tail low and cautious. When it reached the glass, it placed one small clawed hand against it. Jiwoo placed her hand on the glass opposite Rin's, matching the gesture. Rin's eyes widened. The cub made a soft chirping sound, and the other 2 cubs immediately rushed forward, placing their hands on the glass too. Jiwoo laughed quietly. She used her other hand to match one more cub, wishing she had a third hand for the last one. They stayed like that for a few minutes, hands against glass, studying each other. Then, as if by some unspoken agreement, the cubs pulled back. Rin chirped again, and all 3 of them turned and ran into the darkness. But they left something behind. 3 objects sat on the ground near her window. A smooth stone, gray and round. A piece of twisted metal, probably from some old piece of equipment. And a flower, one of the bioluminescent blooms that grew in the settlement gardens, glowing soft blue in the darkness. Jiwoo stared at the objects for a long time. Then she carefully went outside, collected them, and brought them inside. She placed them on her desk where they would be visible through the window. The flower she put in a small cup of water to keep it fresh. The next night, the cubs returned. They saw their gifts displayed on her desk, and the reaction was immediate. All 3 cubs jumped up and down, their tails wagging so hard their whole bodies moved. They chirped and clicked to each other in excited voices. Then they noticed Jiwoo watching and froze, suddenly shy again. Jiwoo pressed her hand to her chest, then pointed at the gifts, then back at her chest. Thank you. She hoped they understood. Rin mimicked the gesture, pressing its hand to its chest. Then the cub pointed at itself, at the other 2 cubs, then at Jiwoo. We give to you. More cubs came the following nights. By the end of the week, there were 6 of them. Rin and the 2 others she'd met first, plus 3 more. There was Dal, the largest with darker scales. HFY, the one with the white chest patch. Subin, whose scales were almost blue in certain light. Kyung, who had a scar on one arm. And Mina, the smallest of all, who could barely walk without stumbling over her own tail. They brought gifts every night. More stones carefully selected for their colors or shapes. Bits of carved wood. Flowers of different types. Scraps of fabric. Pieces of broken things from around the settlement. Each gift was precious to them, Jiwoo could tell. They debated among themselves about what to bring, clicking and chirping in their own language. When Jiwoo accepted something, they celebrated. Jiwoo started learning their body language. Ears forward meant interest or excitement. Ears back meant fear or submission. Tails up was confidence. Tails down was caution. Tails wagging meant happiness. They purred when content, a sound that rumbled deep in their chests. They chirped when excited and clicked when thinking hard about something. She began to understand individual personalities. Rin was the brave leader, always first to try new things. Dao was protective, always watching for danger. HFY was clever, figuring out puzzles quickly. Subin was artistic, bringing the most beautiful gifts. Kyung was energetic, never sitting still. And Mina was sweet and gentle, always staying close to the others. Jiwoo arranged all their gifts carefully in her habitat. She made a display shelf specifically for them, organizing the stones by color, hanging the dried flowers, placing the metal pieces in interesting patterns. She wanted the cubs to see that she valued what they gave her. On the 35th night, disaster nearly struck. Jiwoo heard raised voices outside and looked out to see Chieftain Vekra standing in front of her habitat, the cubs huddled together nearby. His posture was rigid with anger. Jiwoo rushed outside. Chieftain Vekra, please. These cubs have been bothering you, Vekra said, his voice tight. Disturbing your work. This is unacceptable. They will be punished. No, Jiwoo said quickly. No, please. They haven't been bothering me at all. They've been wonderful. Vekra's eyes narrowed. Wonderful? Yes, Jiwoo said firmly. She gestured toward her window, where her desk was visible with all the gifts displayed. They've been teaching me about your culture, about kindness and generosity. They approach with respect and leave gifts. They've helped me understand your people more than any formal observation could. Vekra stared at the display in her window. Then he looked at the cubs, who were trembling but standing their ground. Rin stepped forward slightly, protecting the smaller ones. They give gifts? Vekra said slowly. To you? Every night, Jiwoo said. And I treasure every single one. Something changed in Vekra's expression. The anger melted away, replaced by confusion and something that might have been wonder. He looked at Jiwoo, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. They have chosen you, he said quietly. I did not think, we did not believe, chosen me for what? Jiwoo asked, but Vekra didn't answer. He looked at the cubs again, studying them. Then he nodded once, sharply. Continue, he said. You may visit the human if she allows it. The cubs erupted in excited chirps. Mina jumped so enthusiastically she fell over and Dal helped her up. Vekra turned to leave, then paused. Dr. Park, he said, you see my people clearly, perhaps more clearly than we see ourselves. This is good. He walked away, leaving Jiwoo standing with 6 excited Kravathi cubs who were now apparently, officially allowed to visit her. Rin approached and pressed its hand to Jiwoo's palm, not separated by glass this time. The cub's scales were warm and smooth. Friend, Rin said in careful standard galactic. Jiwoo's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Friend. Jiwoo woke to the sound of scraping and soft clicking outside her habitat. The morning light from Krevmar's twin suns was just beginning to filter through her windows, painting everything in shades of orange and pink. She sat up in bed, confused and still half asleep. More scraping. Then a thump. Then excited chirping. She pulled on her clothes quickly and went to the door. When she opened it, she stopped completely. There was a structure in front of her habitat. Calling it a sculpture would be generous. It was chaos given physical form. A pile of materials stacked and arranged in ways that defied logic or aesthetic sense. At the base were stones of different sizes and colors, some balanced impossibly on others. Wrapped around and through the stones were lengths of wire, some copper, some silver, some that looked like they'd been stripped from old equipment. The wires twisted and curved without pattern. Stuck into gaps between the stones were dozens of flowers, every type that grew in the settlement, their colors clashing violently. Blue bioluminescent blooms next to red thorny ones next to yellow fuzzy ones. Rising from the center were pieces of carved wood, each carved with different patterns that didn't match each other. Metal scraps hung from thin threads, turning slowly in the morning breeze. Strips of fabric in various colors were tied around different sections. At the very top, balanced precariously, was what looked like a small animal skull, cleaned and decorated with paint. It was approximately 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and looked like it might collapse at any moment. It was objectively terrible. The colors fought each other. The materials didn't belong together. There was no artistic unity, no clear purpose to the design. It was the kind of thing that made you squint and wonder what you were looking at. And hidden in the shadows nearby were 6 small Kravathi cubs, watching her with huge, anxious eyes. Jiwoo stepped closer to the structure. She could see now that each piece had been placed with great care. The stones were balanced precisely, the wires wrapped deliberately, the flowers positioned in specific spots. This wasn't random chaos. This was intentional. She walked around it slowly, examining it from every angle. The cubs followed her movement like prey animals watching a predator, their bodies tense and still. Their ears were pinned back against their heads. Their tails barely moved. They were terrified. This meant something, Jiwoo realized. Something important. This wasn't just another gift. This was significant. She thought about everything she'd learned over the past 5 weeks. Kravathi culture valued strength, but they also valued family and loyalty. The cubs had been bringing her gifts steadily, building trust. They'd been teaching her their language and learning hers. They'd been choosing her, Vekra had said. This was their declaration. Their statement. Their masterpiece. All 6 cubs had worked together on this. She could see Rin's bold choices in the central structure, Dal's protective placement of stronger stones at the base, Haewon's clever wirework, Subin's artistic arrangement of flowers, Kyung's energetic addition of hanging pieces, Mina's careful placement of the smallest, most delicate items. This was everything they were, everything they had, given to her in one chaotic, beautiful gesture. Jiwoo felt her eyes fill with tears. She turned to look at the cubs. They were shaking now, especially little Mina. They'd put their hearts into this, and they were waiting to see if she accepted it or rejected it. She knelt down in front of the structure, not caring that the damp ground soaked into her pants. She reached out and touched one of the stones gently, then a flower, then a piece of wire. She studied every detail like it was the most precious thing in the world. Then she stood and faced the cubs. She placed both hands over her heart and spoke in their language, words she'd been practicing for weeks. "This is beautiful," she said clearly. "The most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Thank you all." The effect was instantaneous. 6 cubs exploded out of the shadows, chirping and clicking and purring all at once. They jumped and spun and crashed into each other in their excitement. Mina tripped over her own tail and rolled, and the others piled on top of her in a tangle of scales and tails and joy. Rin recovered first and ran to Jiwoo, skidding to a stop just in front of her. The cub looked up at her with shining eyes. "Beautiful?" Rin asked in standard Galactic. "Really?" "Really," Jiwoo said, and she meant it with everything in her. Because it was beautiful, not in the way art galleries defined beauty, but in the way that mattered. It was love made visible. It was trust built in wire and stone. It was 6 children saying, "You are ours, and we are yours." She pulled out her datapad and took photographs from every possible angle. She documented each section, each piece, each detail. The cubs watched with growing pride, standing taller, their tails lifting high. Other Krevathi began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the noise. They saw the structure and stopped. They saw Jiwoo photographing it like it was a precious artifact. They saw the cubs practically glowing with happiness. Word spread fast. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered. Adults stood in a respectful circle, watching Jiwoo as she carefully examined every part of the cub's gift. Some adults looked confused. Some looked surprised. One older female, who Jiwoo later learned was named Hyori, looked like she might cry. Chieftain Vekra arrived last, his expression serious. He pushed through the crowd and stopped when he saw the structure. His eyes went wide. He looked at the cubs, then at Jiwoo, then back at the chaotic sculpture. "Do you know what this is?" Vekra asked Jiwoo quietly. "A gift," Jiwoo said. "From the cubs to me." "It is more than that," Vekra said. He gestured to Hyori, the older female. "Elder Hyori is our keeper of traditions." "Let her explain." Hyori stepped forward. Her scales were gray with age, and she moved with careful dignity. She studied the structure for a long moment, then turned to Jiwoo. "Among our people, gift-giving is important," Hyori said in slow, careful standard Galactic. "Cubs learn to give gifts to their parents, to their teachers, to their pack. It teaches generosity and connection, but there is one gift that is special above all others." She pointed at the structure. "This is called a pack bond gift. It is made only once in a cub's life and only for someone they choose as family. Not family by birth, but family by choice. These 6 cubs have declared you their pack mother. They have adopted you." The words hit Jiwoo like a physical force. She looked at the cubs, who were all nodding enthusiastically. Mina was crying happy tears and Dal had his arm around her shoulders. "I don't understand," Jiwoo said. "I'm human. I'm not Krevathi. How can I be their pack mother?" "Biology does not make family," Hyori said simply. "Love makes family. These cubs have chosen love." Vekra's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "In our history, no outsider has ever been given a pack bond gift. We did not think it was possible. We believed our cubs would instinctively reject those who were not Krevathi." He looked at Jiwoo with something like wonder. "You have changed what we thought was unchangeable." Jiwoo's tears spilled over. She knelt down and opened her arms. All 6 cubs crashed into her, a pile of scales and purrs and joy. They were surprisingly warm, and their purrs vibrated through her whole body. She held them as tightly as she could, these children who had chosen her across the barrier of species. "I accept," she said, her voice breaking. "I accept your gift. I accept your choice." You are my pack, and I am yours. The adult Cravathi in the crowd made a sound, a collective rumble that came from deep in their chests. It was approval, Jiwoo realized, acceptance. Over the next hour, Cravathi from all over the settlement came to see the pack bond gift. They treated it with reverence, walking around it carefully, studying it with serious expressions. Some of them bowed to Jiwoo. Others simply nodded with respect. Vecra stood beside her as they watched. The galaxy calls us monsters, he said quietly. They say we are violent, untrustworthy, too dangerous for civilized company. But you saw past that. You let our cubs approach. You accepted their gifts. You called their chaos beautiful. It is beautiful, Jiwoo insisted. Every piece tells a story. Every choice shows thought and care. This is art, this is love. Anyone who can't see that isn't looking properly. Vecra was quiet for a moment. Then he said, perhaps that is humanity's gift. You look properly. That evening, as the sun set and the moons rose, Jiwoo sat surrounded by her pack. The 6 cubs curled around her, some sleeping, some half awake and purring. The pack bond gift stood nearby, impossible and perfect. Jiwoo updated her report to Human Command. She attached the photographs and wrote, First contact has been successful. Breakthrough achieved not through diplomacy, but through acceptance. The Cravathi are not monsters. They are people who value family, loyalty, and love. And 6 of their children have just taught me that beauty isn't about perfection. It's about meaning. Send recommendation. Full alliance with Cravathi people. They will be humanity's strongest friends. She looked at the sleeping cubs, her cubs, and smiled. A pile of wires, rocks, and flowers had changed everything, and she would make sure the galaxy knew it. The Galactic Assembly Chamber was the largest room Ambassador Dong-Wook Han had ever stood in. Representatives from 43 different species filled the curved seating areas, each in their designated sections. The Veltorians occupied the prime position near the central platform, their crystalline bodies catching and reflecting light. The Thurians sat in their water-filled tanks. The Mordesh floated in their gravity bubbles, and dozens of others, each stranger than the last. Dong-Wook stood at the central platform, a human alone among aliens about to argue for the impossible. The evidence is clear, he said, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. The Cravathi are not the monsters we believe them to be. Dr. Jiwoo Park has lived among them for 2 months now. She has documented their culture, their values, their way of life. I ask this assembly to review her reports with open minds. A holographic display activated above him, showing Jiwoo's photographs and video footage. The Cravathi settlement with its beautiful architecture, adult Cravathi working together, sharing meals, teaching their young. And then, the moment that made the entire chamber go silent. Jiwoo surrounded by 6 Cravathi cubs, all of them purring contentedly, while she read them a story from a human book. These are not the actions of violent predators, Dong-Wook continued. These are the actions of people who value family and community. People who teach their children to give gifts and show kindness. People who deserve our respect, not our fear. The Veltorian representative, Kilmark, rose from his seat. His crystalline body pulsed with red light, a sign of anger in his species. This is deception, he said, his voice like breaking glass. The Cravathi are apex predators. They have attacked Veltorian ships. They have killed our explorers. One human playing with their cubs does not erase their history of violence. They defended their territory, Dong-Wook countered. Territory that Veltorian expansion fleets tried to claim without permission. The Cravathi did not attack. They defended. There is a difference. Kilmark's light pulsed brighter. You are naive, Ambassador Han. The Cravathi cannot be trusted. They will use your Dr. Park's kindness as weakness. They will strike when you least expect it. Then why haven't they? Another voice joined the debate. The Thurian representative speaking through their water tank's communication system. The human has lived among them for 2 months, unarmed, unguarded. If the Cravathi wanted to harm humanity, would they not have taken this opportunity? The assembly erupted in discussion. Some species argued for caution. Others supported humanity's position. The debate raged for hours. Meanwhile, back on Krevmar, Jiwoo was teaching the cubs about human art. They sat in a circle in her expanded habitat, which the Cravathi had enlarged after she'd been adopted by the cubs. Paper and colored pencils were spread between them. On my world, Jiwoo explained, Humans make pictures to share stories and emotions. Like your pack bond gift, but on paper. Rin picked up a pencil carefully with clawed fingers. Show us? Jiwoo drew a simple picture of a flower. Then she passed the paper to Haewon, who added a sun. Subin drew a bird. Dal added mountains. Kyung drew what might have been a rock or possibly a spaceship. Mina added tiny dots everywhere that could have been stars or just random marks. When they finished, the picture made no logical sense. It was chaotic and messy and completely perfect. This is our picture, Rin said proudly. Together. Yes, Jiwoo agreed. Together. The door to her habitat opened and Elder Hyori entered. She looked troubled. Dr. Park, I must speak with you about our history. If you truly are pack mother to our cubs, you must know the truth of what happened to my people. Over the next hour, Hyori told Jiwoo everything. 50 years ago, the Cravathi had been explorers and traders like any other species. They had joined the Galactic Assembly with hope and excitement. But other species feared them. Their appearance, their strength, their hunting heritage, all of it made others nervous. When the Cravathi settled several uninhabited worlds on the edge of known space, the Veltorian collective claimed those worlds were in their expansion zone. The Cravathi refused to leave their new homes. War broke out. The Cravathi fought fiercely to protect their people, and that fierce defense was twisted into propaganda about violent predators. Other species sided with the Veltorians, not because the Cravathi were wrong, but because they were afraid. The Cravathi were pushed further and further into isolation. They stopped trusting outsiders. They taught their cubs to be strong and wary because the galaxy had proven itself cruel. We became what they accused us of being, Hyori said sadly. Not by choice, but by necessity. We survived by being strong and keeping others away. Jiwoo listened with growing anger. That's not right. That's not fair. Fairness is a luxury, Hyori said. We learned that lesson painfully. Jiwoo looked at the cubs, who had been listening quietly. They looked sad and confused. They were too young to remember the wars, but they'd grown up with the consequences. No, Jiwoo said firmly. It ends now. I won't let your people continue to be treated this way. She sent a detailed report to Ambassador Dongwook, including everything Hyori had told her. She included historical records the Cravathi had kept, showing clearly that they had been defending themselves, not attacking without cause. She included testimonies from adult Cravathi who remembered the old days before the isolation. The report reached the Galactic Assembly just as the debate was reaching its peak. Dongwook presented the new evidence, his voice passionate and clear. We accused them of being monsters, so they became what we needed them to be to survive. We isolated them, so they learned not to trust. We attacked them, so they learned to defend fiercely, and then we blamed them for the very behaviors we forced upon them. The chamber fell silent. Humanity made mistakes in our own history. Dongwook continued. We judged people by how they looked, by how they lived, by what we feared they might do. We learned painfully and slowly that fear breeds hatred and hatred breeds cruelty. We learned to look past our fear to the people underneath. The Cravathi deserve the same chance. The vote was called. It took 3 hours. But in the end, by a narrow margin, the Galactic Assembly agreed to recognize the Cravathi as full members with all rights and protections. The isolation was ended. The propaganda was officially denounced. Trade routes would be opened. Diplomatic relations would begin. When the news reached Krevmar, the celebration was loud and joyful. Adult Cravathi danced in the streets. Cubs played without fear. Chieftain Vekra stood with tears in his eyes. But not everyone was celebrating. 2 weeks after the vote, Commander Taehyun arrived with urgent news. He brought with him Yejin Song, a human engineer, and a medical team. We need to show good faith, Taehyun explained. Several species are still skeptical. They're watching to see if the Cravathi will remain peaceful now that they have assembly protection. We will remain as we have always been, Vekra said firmly. We defend our people. We harm no one who does not threaten us first. I know, Taehyun said, but we need to prove it to others. That's why we brought help. Yejin stepped forward. Dr. Park's reports mentioned damaged infrastructure from the war, power generators that barely work, water purification systems held together with spare parts. Let me help. Let humanity help rebuild what was destroyed. It was a risk, allowing outsiders access to Cravathi settlements, to their technology and systems. But Vecra looked at Jiwoo, who nodded encouragingly. He looked at the cubs, who trusted these humans completely. "Very well," Vecra said. "You may help." The collaboration began slowly. Yejin worked alongside Krevathi engineers, learning their methods while teaching her own. She fixed the failing power generator using a combination of human and Krevathi technology. She improved the water purification system. She helped repair buildings damaged in storms that the Krevathi hadn't had resources to fix properly. Adult Krevathi watched suspiciously at first, but Yejin was patient and respectful. She asked permission before touching anything. She learned Krevathi names for tools and parts. She shared meals with the workers. Slowly, very slowly, trust began to build. Then disaster struck. Little Mina collapsed during a lesson with Jiwoo. The cub's breathing was rapid and shallow, her scales losing their luster. The Krevathi healers examined her and delivered devastating news. Mina had a genetic condition that was slowly killing her. They had treatments that could ease her suffering, but no cure. Jiwoo refused to accept it. She contacted Taehyun immediately, demanding access to human medical technology. The medical team he'd brought examined Mina, ran tests, and discovered something hopeful. Human gene therapy techniques, adapted for Krevathi biology, might cure the condition. It was experimental. It was risky. But without it, Mina would die within months. Jiwoo held Mina through the treatment, whispering encouragement while human doctors and Krevathi healers worked together. The other cubs huddled nearby, scared and silent. Adult Krevathi filled the medical building, watching with anxious eyes. The treatment took 6 hours. When it was finished, Mina was weak but stable. The doctors said they needed to wait to see if it worked. 3 days later, Mina woke up hungry and energetic. The genetic markers for her condition were gone. She was cured. The effect on the settlement was profound. Adult Krevathi, who had been holding back their trust, suddenly opened up. If humans would work this hard to save one small cub, if they would share their advanced medicine freely, then maybe they truly were friends. Vecra approached Jiwoo that evening. "You saved Mina's life," he said simply. "We saved her," Jiwoo corrected. "Human medicine and Krevathi knowledge together. That's what worked." "Yes," Vecra agreed. "Together." He paused. "The galaxy is watching us. They expect us to fail to prove them right about us being monsters. We will not give them that satisfaction. We will show them what the Krevathi truly are, strong, loyal, and capable of great friendship." Jiwoo smiled. "And we'll show them what humans truly are, stubborn enough to believe in second chances." Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humans and Krevathi working together. Humans saving Krevathi lives. The images of Jiwoo surrounded by healthy, happy cubs reached every species. Public opinion began to shift. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had been wrong about the Krevathi. And maybe humanity was showing them a better way forward. 6 months after Dr. Jiwoo Park first arrived on Krevmar, the Galactic Assembly held a historic vote. The Krevathi were officially recognized as full members with complete rights and protections. Trade agreements were established. Diplomatic channels opened. The 50 years of isolation were finally over. But Jiwoo barely paid attention to the political victories. She was too busy watching Rin teach a group of young Thurian diplomats how to identify edible flowers in the settlement gardens. The Thurians, in their environment suits filled with water, moved slowly and carefully. Rin was patient, pointing out each species of plant and explaining its uses in Krevathi culture. Dal stood nearby, protective as always, making sure none of the visitors accidentally touched anything poisonous. Haewon was demonstrating Krevathi weaving techniques to a fascinated Mordish scholar. Subin was painting a mural on a new building, showing human and Krevathi working side by side. Kyung was racing with some human children from the newly established colony, all of them laughing and chirping. And Mina, fully recovered and healthy, was showing off the medical building where she'd been cured, explaining proudly how human and Krevathi medicine had worked together. Other species were beginning to reach out tentatively. The Thurians had been first, curious and scientifically minded. The Mordash followed, interested in cultural exchange. Even some Veltorians, though not the government officials, had quietly visited, seeking to understand what they'd been taught to fear. But the Krevathi remained cautious with most species. They were friendly but guarded. The wounds of isolation didn't heal quickly. Only with humans did they truly relax, truly trust. They see us as pack, Vecra had explained to Ji-Woo. Humans proved themselves through action, not words. Through Dr. Park's acceptance of our cubs, through Engineer Yejin's help rebuilding our infrastructure, through your doctors saving Mina. The Krevathi do not forget such things. Now, as Ji-Woo walked through the settlement, she saw the changes everywhere. New buildings built with both human and Krevathi designs, gardens that included earth plants alongside native Krevmar species, cubs playing with human children, teaching each other games and songs, adult Krevathi and humans working together on projects. The language barrier slowly disappearing as both species learned each other's words. Her original small habitat had been replaced with a larger home, built by Krevathi adults as a gift for their cub's pack mother. It had rooms for all 6 cubs to sleep when they wanted to stay with her. It had a workshop where she could continue her research, and it had a special room, climate-controlled and carefully maintained for her most precious possession. The pack bond gift stood in the center of that room, exactly as it had been built. Ji-Woo had refused to let anyone modify it or improve it. She'd carefully stabilized the structure so it wouldn't collapse, but otherwise left it untouched. Every wire, every stone, every flower was preserved. Some of the flowers had dried and faded, but that was part of their story. This gift represented the moment everything changed, and she would protect it forever. Today was special, though. Today was her last day on Krevmar before her scheduled rotation back to human space. She was supposed to return to Earth for 6 months of debriefing and then be assigned to a new post. It was standard protocol for diplomats and researchers. You didn't stay in one place forever. The cubs knew she was leaving. They'd been preparing for weeks, trying to be brave about it. But as the day wore on, they grew quieter and sadder. Even energetic Kyung moved slowly, tail dragging on the ground. That evening, as the twin suns set and the moons began to rise, Vecra called for an assembly. The entire settlement gathered in the central plaza. Humans who had made Krevmar their home stood among Krevathi families. Visitors from other species watched from designated areas. Ji-Woo stood at the center, confused about what was happening. The 6 cubs stood with her, pressed close against her sides. Vecra stepped forward, dressed in ceremonial robes Ji-Woo had never seen before. Other adult Krevathi joined him, all in similar robes. They formed a circle around Ji-Woo and the cubs. Dr. Ji-Woo Park, Vecra said formally, his voice carrying across the plaza. 6 months ago you came to us as a stranger. You came in peace when others would have come in fear. You accepted our cubs when others would have rejected them. You called beautiful what others would have called chaos. You saw people where others saw only predators. He paused, and Ji-Woo saw emotion in his eyes. Our cubs chose you as pack mother. Today our people choose you as kin chosen. This is a title given only to those who become family not by birth, but by action and love. In our entire history, no outsider has ever received this honor. But you are not an outsider anymore. You are ours and we are yours. The other robed Krevathi stepped forward, each carrying something. Elder Hiyori carried a necklace made of polished stones, each one carved with Krevathi symbols. Another carried a cloak made of woven plant fibers, decorated with patterns that told the story of Ji-Woo's time on Krevmar. A third carried a carved wooden staff, its surface covered in names. Every Krevathi in the settlement had signed it. But the cubs had their own gift. Working together, they carried forward a sculpture. It was nothing like the pack bond gift. This one was carefully crafted, balanced, beautiful by any standard. It showed a human figure surrounded by 6 small Krevathi, all of them with their hands joined together. The craftsmanship was incredible. It must have taken months to create. Rin spoke for all of them, voice proud and clear. We made you a gift before when we were small and didn't know how to make things properly. You called it beautiful anyway. Now we are bigger. We learned proper techniques. We made you this to show how much we grew, but we wanted you to have something else too. Dal stepped forward, carrying the original pack bond gift, the chaotic pile of wires and stones and flowers carefully preserved. We saved it from your room. We hope you don't mind. Ji-Woo stared at both sculptures. The old one, Messy and imperfect but filled with raw love. The new one, skilled and beautiful, showing how much the cubs had learned and grown. Both precious. Both meaningful. This is why we saved the first one, HFY explained. So you can remember where we started. When we were young and scared but brave enough to try. When you were the first to see us as more than our claws and teeth. And this new one shows where we are now, Subin added, touching the beautiful sculpture. Learning, growing, becoming more. But still together. Always together. Both are beautiful, Kyung said firmly. Different beautiful, but both matter. Little Mina stepped forward last. She was still the smallest, but she stood tall and confident now, healthy and strong. You taught us something important, Pack Mother. You taught us that broken things can be beautiful. That messy things can be meaningful. That we don't have to be perfect to be loved. Jiwoo's vision blurred with tears. She knelt down and all 6 cubs crashed into her arms. The Krevathi in the crowd rumbled their approval. The humans applauded. Even the visiting aliens seemed moved by the ceremony. When she could speak again, Jiwoo looked at Vekra. About my rotation back to Earth, she said. I need to discuss something. Of course, Vekra said. What troubles you? I don't want to leave, Jiwoo said simply. I've already contacted my superiors. They've agreed to establish a permanent human liaison position here on Krevmar. I've requested that position. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not for 6 more months or a year. Permanently, this is my home now. These are my people. I don't want to leave them. The cubs exploded with joy, jumping and chirping and spinning. Mina cried happy tears. Rin howled at the moons. Dal picked up HFY and spun him around. Subin and Kyung chased each other in excited circles. Vekra's expression softened into something Jiwoo had rarely seen on a Krevathi face. Pure, unguarded happiness. We accept, he said, gladly. Build your life here, Kin Chosen. You will always have a place among us. The celebration lasted long into the night. Krevathi and humans danced together to music that blended both cultures. Food from both worlds was shared freely. Stories were told in multiple languages. The cubs fell asleep in a pile, exhausted from excitement, and Jiwoo sat with them, stroking their scales gently. Elder Hiyori sat down beside her. You changed everything, you know, the old Krevathi said quietly. Not just for us, but for the entire galaxy. You showed other species that their fears were wrong. You built a bridge we thought impossible. I just accepted some gifts from children, Jiwoo said. Anyone could have done it. No, Hiyori said firmly. Most would have seen danger and walked away. Most would have seen our cubs' chaotic gift and called it garbage. Most would have let their fear decide for them. You chose love instead. That is not common. That is exceptional. Jiwoo looked at the 2 sculptures that now stood side by side in her new home. The messy one that started everything. The beautiful one that showed growth and learning. Both telling the same story. That connection matters more than perfection. That understanding matters more than fear. That love can bridge any gap if you're brave enough to try. Over the next weeks, more humans arrived to establish the colony. They came not as conquerors or researchers, but as neighbors and friends. They learned from the Krevathi and taught what they knew. Together they built something new. A community where species didn't just coexist but thrived together. Rin grew into a strong, confident young Krevathi, with dreams of becoming a diplomat like Jiwoo. Dal became a teacher, showing others how to protect and care for their communities. HFY became an inventor, combining human and Krevathi technology in creative ways. Subin became an artist whose work was displayed across the galaxy. Kyung became an explorer, mapping new regions of Krevmar with human partners, and Mina became a doctor, dedicating her life to helping others the way she had been helped. But they always came home to their pack mother. Always remembered the wire and stones and flowers. Always knew that the most beautiful things in life were often the messiest, the most imperfect, the most unexpected. Years later, when Jiwoo was old and her scales of adopted cubs had cubs of their own, when human Krevathi families were common across the galaxy, when the Galactic Assembly held up their partnership as the model for peaceful integration, she would sit in her home and look at those 2 sculptures, and she would remember the moment 6 frightened cubs offered her a pile of chaos and waited to see if she would accept them. She called it beautiful then. She called it beautiful still, and she always would. Because the truth she learned on Krevmar, the truth she spent her life teaching others was simple. Love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing the value in broken pieces and choosing to build something together anyway. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not superior technology or military might, but the radical idea that every species deserved to be seen clearly, accepted fully, and loved completely. And it all started with a pile of wires, rocks, and flowers, and a woman brave enough to call it beautiful.